I didn't even realize I was smiling until she said it. "You're smiling again." I froze mid-step, my hands sticky with grease from the engine I'd been tinkering with, and she was standing there at the doorway of the shop, arms crossed, one eyebrow arched. Her heels clicked lightly against the concrete floor, and somehow the sound made the entire room feel smaller, warmer, more urgent. "Because you walked in," I said before I could stop myself. My voice sounded too casual, but my chest felt too loud, like it had been holding its own secret for days. She tilted her head, that faint smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. She was in her mid-40s, maybe a little older than that, but it didn't matter. She carried herself like she'd already survived 1,000 storms and still had the right to look perfectly unbothered. And yet, when she looked at me, her eyes lingered, just a fraction longer than they had to. I wiped my hands on a rag, trying to act like I wasn't acutely aware of every detail. The way her hair caught the light, a little silver near her temples, the faint perfume that smelled like vanilla and rain, the way her sleeves were rolled up neatly to just below her elbows. She looked complete, like she didn't need anything from anyone, but somehow, just standing there, she was holding something just for me. There was a pause, long enough for the radio to hum in the background, long enough for a bolt to roll across the floor, long enough for me to feel my heartbeat echoing in my ears. I needed to check on that order," I muttered, pretending the car in front of me mattered more than the electricity crackling in the air between us. She leaned against the doorframe, casually, but not without purpose. One leg bent, the heel tapping lightly, her eyes sweeping over the shop as if she owned it, or maybe she just belonged in it. Then she looked at me again. "And are you always this charming when you're nervous?" Her smile was teasing, but not mean, the kind of smile that makes you question if she's reading you or daring you. I swallowed and laughed softly, a sound that felt too small in the wide, dusty room. Maybe just today, there was something unspoken in that moment, a brief flicker of recognition, or maybe it was curiosity. I couldn't tell. She straightened up, glancing toward the stack of invoices, then back at me, and for a second, it was like we were suspended outside of time. I wanted to say something stupid and intimate, but all I could manage was a crooked grin. Then she did something small, almost insignificant. She handed me a mug of coffee, her hand brushing mine just enough to make me notice, and said, "I thought you might need this." It was only coffee, just coffee, but the warmth of her hand against mine sent a jolt through my chest, the kind that makes your stomach tighten and your brain scramble for normal words. I caught myself staring too long, aware that I'd just handed her the opening to notice me. Or maybe, I thought desperately, to look away and pretend it didn't matter. She turned away then, walking toward the counter, flipping through a stack of papers as if she had more important things to do. And I watched her, lingering at the edge of the counter, my hands still sticky with grease, my smile stubbornly refusing to fade. I couldn't stop thinking about the way she moved, the way she looked at me, the way she had somehow made a few words and a coffee feel like an entire conversation. And as I leaned back against the hood of the car, pretending to work, I realized I'd replay that little spark over and over in my head. Because for the first time in a long time, I didn't just feel noticed. I felt seen. I saw her again the next morning, leaning over the counter with that same careful precision that made her look like she owned the world even when she was just filing papers. I was supposed to be helping with inventory, but somehow my attention was entirely elsewhere, on the line of her neck, the way her fingers lingered on a stack of invoices, the faint shadow under her eyes that spoke louder than her polite smile ever could. "Can you check these for me?" she asked, without looking up. Her voice was calm, professional, but it didn't mask the tension in her shoulders. She slid a small pile of receipts across the counter. "Sure," I said, reaching for them. Our hands brushed lightly. Again, and I caught that little spark she'd started last night. I didn't comment. I just let it linger, like a secret we were both keeping. She straightened and leaned back, rubbing at her temple with one hand. I noticed the faint tremor in her fingers, the tired curve of her mouth, the way her laugh came too quickly and too soft when a coworker made a joke. She was impeccable on the outside, flawless even, but the tiny fractures, the micro behaviors she couldn't fully hide, made her feel achingly human. "Do you ever get tired of all this?" I asked quietly, nodding at the stacks of paperwork, the phones ringing off the hook, the clipboard in her other hand. She blinked, as if surprised anyone had asked. Then she shook her head. "It's not that bad," she said, but her voice caught slightly on the last word. She didn't look at me, but the barest hesitation in her posture said more than words could. I didn't push. I just watched. Watched the way her hand brushed hair from her forehead, how her eyes darted to the window even though it was gray and raining outside, how her chest rose and fell a fraction slower than it should. There was something fragile beneath her confidence, something she didn't offer freely, and I couldn't stop noticing. She laughed a little later, sharp, quick, a laugh that tried to fill a space bigger than it was, and I realized how rare it must be for her to feel light, even for a moment. Her smile was brief, fleeting, but it caught me off guard like the first crack of sunlight after a storm. "Here," she said suddenly, handing me a stapler across the counter. Our fingers touched again, just barely, but enough for me to feel it. A small, electric pulse, almost a whisper of what could be. She pulled back immediately, as if surprised by the contact herself, and I thought for a second she might scold me for lingering, but she didn't. Instead, she simply looked at me with that careful, guarded expression, and I noticed a flicker in her eyes. Hesitation, maybe even fear, or maybe longing. Whatever it was soft, delicate, but undeniable. I held her gaze for a beat longer than I should have, wondering if she knew how deeply I noticed her. Not just the surface, but the subtleties. The exhaustion she masked, the tiny gestures she didn't intend anyone to see, the weight she carried silently. Then she turned away, flipping through another pile of papers, and I stayed where I was, hands idle, heart racing. And just for a moment, the air between us held something forbidden, something charged, something that neither of us said but both of us felt. The rain had started again, hammering against the windows in a rhythm that made the room feel smaller, warmer, almost private. We were alone in the back office, surrounded by stacks of invoices and half-finished reports, the hum of the fluorescent lights filling the gaps between us. "I didn't expect you to stay late," she said, looking over her shoulder at me as I sorted through a pile of forms. Her voice was soft, careful, but there was an edge to it, like she was daring herself not to say more. "I could ask you the same," I said, and our eyes met, lingering too long. My chest tightened at the unspoken something between us. She shifted closer to the desk, and I noticed the subtle weight of her presence, the heat radiating from her, the faint scent of coffee and vanilla that always seemed to cling to her. I wanted to lean in, wanted to tell her that I noticed every tremble in her hands, every tired line in her expression, but I didn't. I only observed, silent, careful. A sudden ping from her phone broke the moment. She glanced down, frowned slightly, and I caught the name flashing on the screen. "An ex, maybe." She hesitated before silencing it, the shadow of something unresolved crossing her face. I didn't ask. I just waited, the air thick around us. "Why do you always notice everything?" she muttered finally, not meeting my eyes. Her fingers tapped a pen against the desk, a nervous rhythm she didn't bother to disguise. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe because no one else seems to." She let out a small, incredulous laugh, the kind that comes out when someone tries to dismiss a truth they can't quite deny. She shifted again, close enough that our shoulders brushed lightly as she leaned over a pile of papers. My stomach flipped at the contact, and I swallowed hard, reminding myself that this wasn't the time to act on it. Not really. We worked in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the rustling of paper and the rain outside. Every so often, I caught her glancing at me from the corner of her eye, and I felt the pull. Dangerous, electric, but I said nothing. Restraint felt heavier than any confession I could offer. Then, as I reached across the desk to grab a folder, our hands brushed. Not just lightly. Her fingers lingered for a heartbeat longer than necessary. I froze, and I thought maybe she did too. There was a flicker in her gaze, a hesitation, a question left unsaid. She pulled back immediately, almost too quickly, and cleared her throat, forcing a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You should finish that stack," she said softly. I nodded, though I didn't move. My fingers itched to reach for hers again, to close the tiny gap between us, but I didn't. Instead, I watched her gather papers, feeling the electricity between us hum louder than the storm outside. And for a moment, just a moment, it felt like we were on the edge of something that could break or ignite, and neither of us said the word. I stayed frozen, thinking of that lingering touch, that near imperceptible glance, the unspoken possibility that had hovered just long enough to make my heart pound. The office was quiet now, the storm outside slowing to a drizzle. Papers were stacked neatly, pens lined up like soldiers, and yet nothing about the room felt orderly. We sat on opposite sides of the desk, neither moving, both aware of the space that suddenly felt far too small. "I don't understand," she said finally, her voice low, almost broken. She wasn't looking at me, but her fingers fiddled with the edge of a folder, twisting it until the paper crinkled. "What are we doing here? Like this?" I swallowed. That question, so simple, so direct, hung in the air, heavy enough to press against my ribs. I wanted to answer, but the words I had rehearsed 1,000 times evaporated. I could only watch her, noticing the tension in her shoulders, the faint tremble in her jaw, the exhaustion she didn't let anyone see. I don't know," I admitted. My voice was smaller than I intended, raw in a way that made me flinch. I can't stop noticing you." She laughed softly, but it was hollow, tinged with disbelief. She finally looked at me then, and for the first time, I saw her vulnerability laid bare, the fear that her control could slip, that the careful mask she wore so consistently might crack. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered. "I shouldn't be letting this tension, this whatever this is, exist." Her eyes darted away, then back, searching my face as if hoping I'd give her permission to ignore it. Or maybe she was asking herself. I leaned forward, hands resting on the edge of the desk, feeling the gravity in her gaze. "You're already here," I said quietly, "whether you like it or not." Her lips parted, like she wanted to argue, to deny, to assert control, but nothing came out. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the soft hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional drip from the storm outside. I could see the fatigue in her eyes, the way her chest rose and fell unevenly, how tightly she gripped the folder as if it were a lifeline. And I realized, painfully, that this wasn't about romance yet. It was about recognition, about two people noticing the cracks in their own carefully built lives reflected in the other. I can't," she finally said, voice trembling. She closed her eyes, pressing her forehead against the cool edge of the desk for a moment. I'm not built for this. Not for whatever this is between us." I wanted to reach across, wanted to reassure her, wanted to tell her it was okay to let go, but I stayed still, because this wasn't something you fixed with words or touch. This was a confession without confession, a raw pulse of honesty neither of us could ignore. She sat up slowly, drawing a shaky breath, and for a second I thought she might leave. And then she whispered, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "I'm tired of pretending I don't feel it, but I don't know if I can survive it if I do." The words landed like stones, heavy, irreversible. I nodded, silently acknowledging her truth, my own chest tight, my own hands trembling slightly. And that was it. No comfort, no resolution. Just the weight of her voice, the intensity of her stare, and the devastating knowledge that this, whatever it was real, and neither of us could undo it. I was stacking invoices when she appeared at the doorway again, clutching a small envelope like it weighed more than it should. Her shoulders were tight, her steps hesitant, and for a second I thought she might turn and leave. But she didn't. "I found something," she said, voice low, careful. "Something I didn't expect to see." She held it out to me, fingers brushing the edge of the envelope. My stomach tightened, not from the touch, not exactly, but from the way her hand lingered just enough to feel like a promise or a warning. I took it without a word. The handwriting on the front was familiar, the script curling elegantly, painfully. I knew it even before I opened it. Inside was a letter, folded neatly, edges worn as if it had been read too many times. Her eyes met mine for the briefest moment, and I saw it there. Hesitation, fear, the weight of a past she hadn't shared. I lost someone, she said, almost in a whisper, as if speaking aloud made it real. A long time ago, someone I should have fought for. Her fingers trembled as they rested on the desk. And I didn't. I swallowed. I knew the story. The heartbreak, the regret. It was written on her face, in the quiet lines near her eyes, the way she held herself like a carefully folded secret. I remember you telling me about him, I said softly. You said it was complicated. Her lips pressed together, a small, tight line. Complicated doesn't even begin to cover it, she admitted. She looked away, focusing on a small crack in the paint on the wall, as if it held all the answers. I've carried it with me, thinking it would stay manageable. But I saw this letter today, and it just came back. I didn't reach out. I didn't speak. I just watched her, noticing the subtle shifts in her posture, the way her fingers twitched, the tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. She was so strong, always so composed, and yet here she was, unmasked, raw, and human. I didn't want to remember, she murmured, almost to herself. But somehow, I had to. She looked at me again, eyes glimmering, unguarded, asking without asking. I wanted to tell her something. Anything. That could make it easier, lighter. But there were no words that could erase the history she carried. Only the shared understanding that some things can't be fixed, only witnessed. We sat like that for a long moment. The only sounds the faint hum of the office lights and the soft drip of rain outside. I could feel the shift, subtle but seismic, in the space between us. The unspoken weight of her past had landed, and for the first time, I understood something fundamental about her. Not just her strength, not just her poise, but the fractures that made her who she was, and why she was impossible to ignore. Finally, she exhaled slowly, almost like a confession to the air rather than to me. I just needed someone to see it, she whispered, and that simple line hit me harder than any declaration ever could. I nodded, silent, my chest tight, because seeing her, truly seeing her, was already changing everything between us, even if neither of us said the words out loud. The office smelled faintly of paper and coffee, the storm having finally passed. Outside, the sky was gray but soft, and the kind of quiet that follows rain settled over everything. She was at her desk, moving slowly, deliberately, like she was weighing each action before committing to it. I lingered by the doorway, pretending to organize files, though I could feel her presence in every corner of the room. There was a tension now, yes, but also something quieter, something that didn't need words to exist. I'm glad you stayed, she said softly, without looking up. Her fingers drummed lightly on the desk, a rhythm that seemed to mirror my own heartbeat. Even if it's just for the work. I nodded, and stepped closer, letting the space between us shrink naturally, not forced. She glanced up briefly, eyes meeting mine for just a second longer than necessary, and then she returned to her papers. But that glance carried everything we hadn't said, the confusion, the longing, the recognition that whatever this was, it wasn't going away. I pulled a chair up beside her desk and sat, careful not to crowd her, careful to let the silence speak for us. We didn't need to fill it. The rain's aftermath hummed softly through the windows, the distant city noises muted, and in that quiet, the weight of all the moments between us, the smiles, the touches, the almost confessions, settled like dust into the room. I don't want to ruin anything, she murmured, almost to herself. Her hand moved slightly, brushing a stray piece of paper, and I noticed the tremor in her fingers again. But I can't pretend it's not there either. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My own hand moved, slowly, hesitantly, until our fingers brushed. A spark, yes, but quieter this time, steady, grounding, a wordless acknowledgement that we were both present, fully, without expectation. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let her hand rest lightly against mine. The gesture was small, almost imperceptible to anyone else, But to me it felt monumental, a recognition that the connection had shifted, had deepened, without either of us forcing it. We sat like that for a while, watching the light change as clouds passed, letting the shared silence speak louder than any declaration could. No promises, no dramatic gestures, just this quiet acceptance, this understanding that what had begun as something fleeting and confusing had become something inevitable. Her lips curved faintly in a smile, tired but genuine, and I mirrored it without thinking. Not because we had spoken the words, but because the air between us had done it for us. Finally, she drew a slow breath, lifting her eyes to meet mine fully this time. "We'll figure it out," she said softly. No fanfare, no exclamation, just a simple acknowledgement of what was and what could be. I squeezed her hand once, lightly, and let it rest there, knowing that in that small, quiet touch, everything we hadn't dared to say aloud was understood. And for the first time in months, maybe years, the tension didn't hurt. It settled. It softened. It became a presence we could inhabit together. We didn't speak again for a long time. We didn't need to. The quiet finality of that moment, the shared space, the hand resting lightly in mine, that was enough. It's quiet here now, months later, though not empty. The shop hums with its usual rhythm, papers shuffled, engines revving in the distance. I catch myself thinking about her sometimes, not the moments we couldn't have, or the tension that nearly unraveled everything, but the subtle, quiet ones that built something neither of us could ignore. She's changed, I think. Not in big, dramatic ways, but in the small ones. The way she lets herself pause now, how her smiles lingered just a little longer, how she notices things I do, not because she has to, but because she wants to. And I've changed too. More patient, more aware, less afraid of seeing someone fully and letting them see me back. It wasn't easy. It was awkward. It was messy. It was filled with long silences and hesitant words. But that's the point, isn't it? Love, or whatever this is, doesn't arrive fully formed. It sneaks in through touches that linger too long, glances that hold more than they should, and moments of shared understanding that neither of us needed to name. Sometimes I catch her at the counter, watching me with that same quiet intensity she had from the very first day. And I catch myself smiling, not because I have to, not because it's easy, but because I finally understand what it means to be present with someone who sees you in full. The cracks, the fatigue, the stubborn joy of being alive and not flinch. We don't talk about it much. We don't need to. There are no confessions at the end of the day, no grand declarations, no perfect resolutions. Just shared space, hand brushes across a desk, coffee offered and accepted, and the occasional look that lingers a heartbeat too long. That's enough. That's more than enough. I've learned that love isn't always a flood of fireworks. Sometimes it's a quiet river, slow, steady, and warm. It's noticing her laugh when she thinks no one is looking. It's her noticing me noticing her. It's the tension that fades into comfort, the hesitation that becomes trust. It's complicated, yes, but in that complexity, there's beauty. I think back to the first night she walked in, that spark that made me smile without thinking. Who would have guessed it would become this? This subtle, unspoken partnership, this quiet knowing that we exist for each other in ways neither of us fully admit aloud. And I smile again, because I know now that some things aren't meant to be rushed. They're meant to be felt, to be lived, to be noticed in every small gesture and lingering glance. So, if you're still here, watching, reading, feeling, maybe notice the small moments around you too. Sometimes the most real, the most enduring love is the one you see in the quiet after the storm, in the hand you reach for without thinking, in the glance that says everything you didn't dare speak. And maybe, just maybe, you'll recognize it when it's right in front of you.